Stay down. Final warning. I could do this all day.
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy. So, is the superhero movie dead? That's what we keep hearing over and over in the press as people just love writing about superhero fatigue. So I'm going to dive really deep into this question. I'm going to get kind of personal here too, because we're going to talk about why these movies are in trouble, but I'm also going to talk about why Hollywood hates superhero movies so much. And frankly, hearing people talk over and over about superhero fatigue makes me just a little bit upset.
But why?
Because after decades of watching every other kind of movie under the sun, we finally get a great string of superhero movies, and non-geeks everywhere can't wait for that fad to end. And later, I'm going to talk about what these stories need to do to improve, and how for this subgenre to succeed, they need to grow upward instead of outward. So, this idea of encroaching superhero fatigue has been around for a while. Steven Spielberg made some headlines in 2015 when he told the Associated Press, "We were around when the Western died, and there will be a time when the superhero movie goes the way of the Western." And of course the press leapt on that, saying Spielberg was predicting the end of superhero movies as we know it. But people always forget the second half of his statement. It doesn't mean that there won't be another occasion where the Western comes back and the superhero movie someday returns.
Oh, curse you, fine print!
In other words, Spielberg acknowledged that public tastes and trends are largely cyclical, and it does look like the superhero boom has now slowed down. Quantumania had a 69% drop its second weekend. Shazam 2 was basically dead on arrival. The Flash opened, I think, at less than 60 million. The Marvels barely opened at over 60 million. The Amazing Blue Beetle was barely a blip on the radar, despite being the third best superhero film of the year. In fact, David A. Gross runs a movie consulting firm called Franchise Research Institute, and he said in a newsletter that the growth of the genre has stopped. So, to industry analysts, it looks like superhero fatigue has finally set in. So does that mean that it's all doom and gloom for geeks like us when it comes to seeing our favorite heroes grace the big screen?
Man, I am starving because something in here just smells amazing. Urgh.
Actually, man, that's me. See, I'm wearing...
You're wearing food?
No, dude, I'm wearing cologne.
You can eat cologne?
No, you don't eat...
You guys eat cologne?
No, guys, you can't eat cologne. Don't eat cologne. But it does smell nice, right?
Oh yeah, I like the smell.
Oh yeah,
it
smells
Very
great.
nice.
You're great. Thanks, guys. This is Missoni by Missoni for Men. It is a high-end fragrance, but I was able to get it through Scentbird. They're the sponsor of this video. This is a great service for a guy like me because I got no idea what makes for a good cologne, and cologne is so expensive, so I didn't want to drop a lot of money on a super pricey bottle. So Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service that lets you skip any month with no penalties. And if you are new to wearing cologne, this is a great way to start. Now, to educate me about the cologne, they sent along these descriptive cards that explain the ingredients and the proper occasion to wear this cologne. This month, my favorite was Acqua di Parma by Zafferano.
Oh, what's in that?
Well, Doug, it says here this one has hints of mandarin, jasmine, tonka bean.
Those are all things you can eat.
Yeah, sure, technically, but again, you can't eat cologne.
Oh, jeez.
So guys, these sample bottles are actually 8 times bigger than a normal sample size you would get in a store. You can choose a designer fragrance every month for just $17. You get a 30-day supply and you get to pick whatever you want to receive, so there are no surprises. This is a great way to learn about cologne, find what you like, without spending hundreds of dollars on a bottle. Like, a dash of cologne has become an important part of my morning routine. You shower, you get spruced up, and the finishing touch is just a bit of cologne. So if you want to give Scentbird a try, click this QR code and use our code SCVideo, and click the link in the description to get 55% off. That's just over $7 for your first month, available in the USA and Canada. Thanks again to Scentbird for sponsoring this video, and check out our sample links below.
Yeah, you really do smell great, person.
Thanks, buddy. High five. Now, back to superhero fatigue. First, I want to ask, what is it we're supposedly fatigued of?
Yeah, I mean, what does fatigue even mean? It means tired. Gosh, this stupid thing doesn't know anything.
Aw, Doug, be nice to the Doug the Manager plushie. And by the way, everyone, we are selling these Doug plushies for a very limited time in partnership with Makeshift. You only have about 9 more days to get yours. They're fun, they're soft, each one is handmade and pretty expensive to produce. The link is down below. Please help us meet our goal. So, let me backtrack here and explain why people will never, ever get tired of superhero stories. First of all, comic book movies are not a genre. Genres are a classification of a type of art, like horror, drama, suspense, etc. Comic books are a medium. Like, you wouldn't call movies a genre, they're a medium that encompasses many genres, and so are comics. Similarly, superheroes are not a genre.
If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
Technically, they're a subgenre of speculative fiction, but as one of our writers, Brianna McLarty, pointed out to me, superheroes are actually more of an archetype. The archetype is an exceptional person who uses their exceptional skills to help others. This archetype has existed as long as people have been telling stories. Gilgamesh, Hercules, Achilles. Hell, you don't even need powers to be part of this archetype. Odysseus was a proto-Batman, an ordinary human who was skilled in all means of contending, who challenged the will of the gods in the Odyssey. Now, it's become a cliche to say it, but superheroes really are our modern-day myths. And when you study like world mythology, or take a shortcut and read Joseph Campbell's Power of Myth, you can see that every single group of humans on planet Earth has recreated these same archetypes independently from one another. So the idea of a superhero is rooted in our collective unconscious, and it will never go away. It's the same impulse that leads to hero worship of athletes or politicians or your favorite K-pop band.
Smooth like butter. Come on, guys. Smooth like butter.
So we have this universal archetype of the superhero that resonates within all of us. And then you can apply that archetype to different genres. Batman can be in a gritty 90s-esque conspiracy thriller, or he can be in a campy comedy. So the form of superheroes may change depending on popular tastes, but we will always seek out a form of the superhero.
I believe there's a hero in all of us.
So to understand if this current age of superheroes is dying, I think we have to take a look back and ask how we got here, and then ask ourselves, why are superheroes so popular right now? Where did the age of superhero movies come from? Now, first of all, Hollywood is like any other popular commercialized art form. It will always follow trends. There's always one artist who innovates, and then everybody else comes along to copy that innovation.
Customization. Genius.
Until people become tired and seek out something new.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
In the silent movie era, westerns were massively popular. I mean, after all, the Old West still existed within living memory. But westerns had been kind of dormant until Johns Ford and Wayne resurrected the genre with Stagecoach.
Whoa, steady, ho. Hey, look, it's Ringo.
Then there was a massive Western boom. The genre took over films, comics, music, and TV. Hell, Gunsmoke ran on TV for 20 seasons and held the record for longest running primetime series of all time for 40 years until The Simpsons broke that record.
I'm here to break a world record.
Every week, 30 million people would sit down and watch Bonanza, and 30 million people don't sit down and watch anything anymore except the Super Bowl. Now, just like with superhero movies, westerns developed easily replicated conventions that the public became tired of. There was the idea that there was always a white hat cowboy fighting a black hat outlaw, but then along came artists who challenged this convention. In Fred Zinnemann's High Noon, the cowardly townspeople don't back their brave sheriff. In fact, they even reverse the white hat black hat dynamic of the hero and the villain. And in The Searchers, John Wayne's character's racism is an obstacle that he has to overcome in order to fulfill his mission. Westerns still captured this feeling of the frontier of exploration. The idea that there was a vast land filled with unknown adventure appealed to adults and kids.
Hey, Mike, do you think we might shut that thing off?
No, are you crazy?
And that frontier was replaced with the final frontier when the Soviets launched Sputnik, and suddenly every kid wanted a space toy.
Once the astronauts went up, children only wanted to play with space toys.
Suddenly, films about aliens, monsters, and atomic horror replaced westerns at the box office and in the comic books. So filmmakers began to be innovative with the western. Artists like Sam Peckinpah, Sergio Leone, and Clint Eastwood created anti-hero gunslingers. These societal outcasts were more in line with the countercultural appeal of the late 60s and early 1970s. And the genre also fell into parody with films like Blazing Saddles.
And no, stay away them bushwhacking, hornswoggling croaker is gonna roll away, biscuit cutter.
Now remember all of this because we're going to see history repeat itself later when we talk about superhero movies. Now the early 1970s also saw the rise of dystopian sci-fi films like Planet of the Apes, Logan's Run, or Zardoz. These were not like zippy fun stories like Lost in Space. These were artists using science fiction to look at modern day society in the mold of writers like Ray Bradbury or Isaac Asimov. The 1970s also saw the rise of the new wave Hollywood films, gritty street stories like Mean Streets, The French Connection, and Easy Rider. But another huge trend in the 1970s was disaster movies like Meteor or the ship-sinking spectacle The Poseidon Adventure, The Towering Inferno, Earthquake. Before the genre was temporarily put to bed by the movie Airplane.
It's an entirely different kind of flying, altogether. It's an entirely different kind of flying.
And of course, the 1970s also saw the rise of the modern-day blockbuster with Jaws and Star Wars, two movies that were actually remixes of old Hollywood genres, the monster movie and the western. Now, I should also note that the 1970s also saw our first wave of nostalgia culture. Boomers who had just lived through the tumultuous 1960s were suddenly nostalgic for their childhood, so movies like George Lucas's American Graffiti were also resonating with the audience as well. In fact, American Graffiti would basically be spun off into the series Happy Days, which ran for 11 seasons. And this is where superhero movies, in their modern form, finally entered this conversation, with 1978's Superman the movie.
Safe again, Superman. Thanks to you.
No, sir. Don't thank me, Warden. We're all part of the same team.
You see, superhero movies have always combined elements of whatever genre was popular at the time. Superman the movie, which by the way is still my favorite superhero film of all time, is the best example of combining different genres. The first 20 minutes are like a dark, dystopian 70s sci-fi picture. The next half hour, about Clark's life in Smallville, plays like a nostalgia film set in the 1950s.
You are here for a reason. It's not to score touchdowns.
And after Clark arrives in Metropolis, the movie becomes a sunny, optimistic comic strip before becoming a 1970s disaster movie. Like, this film was a massive hit. It tapped into people's nostalgia for their childhoods and their hope for a better future. It wasn't a hit because it was a superhero movie, but because it resonated with audiences. And we can see this same pattern through every hit superhero movie that's released since then. The 1980s saw the rise of kid-friendly franchises made to sell toys like Gremlins, Transformers, and Star Wars. But the 1980s also saw the rise of the muscly action hero, and those films were an extension of the gritty 1970s vigilante street movies like Death Wish and Dirty Harry.
I have rights. What
Actually, that genre should have ended when Scorsese tore it to pieces with Taxi Driver, but that's for another video essay. But what I'm getting to here is that Tim Burton's Batman, again, combines several popular aesthetics of the time. Watching it today, it feels a lot more like a 1980s action movie than a modern superhero movie. It's got lots of guns, the hero murdering people, and of course, like all 80s kids movies, there were still toys.
Batman's battle against crime never ends, and now you can bring the action home.
Now, I'm using these two films as an example because they drew from very different trends, and they were massive pop culture touchstones. So when you go through every successful superhero franchise afterwards, you can see that they successfully tapped into the zeitgeist and the cinematic trends of the time. The X-Men was a slick action movie that was in the mold of The Matrix, with a theme of battling racism. Spider-Man tapped into Americans' desire to unite after 9/11.
You mess with Spidey, you mess with New York! You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us!
And Tony Stark was an American military fixture who was trying to unilaterally fix a broken system. Nolan's Batman is fighting terrorists, you get the idea. And just to touch on the TV side of things, the Arrowverse also did exceptional work for a long time, creating an interconnected universe that spanned several genres as well.
I could be in Modesto by now. Oh, shut up and dig, George Lucas.
And the Marvel Cinematic Universe succeeded, in part, because the franchise created great characters and great movies and made cinema a must-watch experience. Our culture is increasingly fragmented, so it was nice having something in common with each other, a reason to go out and go to the movies together. And from Superman to the MCU, all of these franchises had one thing in common. Hollywood executives had no idea what to do with them. They made Richard Pryor the star of a Superman movie.
Watch the trees.
In fact, they even replaced an action scene in the movie with Richard Pryor talking about what happened in the action scene.
He was flying! He was great!
They turned the gothic tone of Batman into a cartoon.
7 million. Never leave the cave without him.
They forced Raimi to include Venom in Spider-Man 3. They abruptly ended the X-Men franchise to kickstart solo films like X-Men Origins Wolverine. Until the MCU, it seemed like Hollywood did not understand superheroes. And even then, and we've talked about this a lot on this channel, former Disney CEO Bob Chapek forced Marvel Studios to rush out more and more content for Disney Plus, watering down the brand and making people take the MCU for granted.
As John Craigie would sing, They were dissecting the bird to find the song.
Damn straight. The great strength of the MCU was that everything they made felt like a must-watch event. But, like with all superheroes, the source of their strength became their weakness. Telling audiences they had to watch everything made the MCU feel like homework. Plus, ever since Iron Man, most Marvel movies follow the basic same template. The humor, the action, the CGI. When you walk into a Marvel movie, you know what you're gonna get. So the franchise's appeal is familiarity, but too many superhero movies have been offering the same thing or employing the same tropes. For instance, sky beams. Too many sky beams. So that sense of urgency that the MCU created is potent, but delicate. It used to be comforting that you knew what you would be getting from an MCU film. Marvel Studios has a house style of visual effects artist that made this like a comfortable world to revisit. But now that comfortable feeling has become a weakness. There's too much uniformity in the action scenes. The visuals are too similar, and for some people, constantly undermining drama with a joke is getting really, really old.
Stop.
Like Variety's Owen Gleiberman said, that's what everyone is tired of, when a comic book movie looks and feels like every other damn comic book movie. And the more of them that come out, the more that will happen. I resent the term comic book movie, but the point is taken. But here's the thing. In 2023, familiarity wasn't just a weakness of superhero films. This was a weakness of every major existing franchise. Mission Impossible, Fast and the Furious, Indiana Jones, all of these proven franchises underperformed. In fact, I would argue that Indy 5 would have done better if the marketing would have sold us on the actual story instead of like leaning into nostalgia. Because if there's anything the 2023 box office has shown us, it's that people want to be surprised again. Barbie and Oppenheimer didn't just offer fans two great movies, they also kind of inadvertently offered fans an experience. But see, after those box office disappointments, nobody's out there talking about Vin Diesel fatigue or Tom Cruise fatigue. So why are they obsessed with superhero fatigue? Now, but the MCU does keep teasing storylines and characters that aren't actually happening. We don't know when we're going to see Hercules. We don't know when they're going to go get the Eternals from space. We don't know when a Shang-Chi sequel is going to come out. We don't even know who sent the beacon at the end of Shang-Chi. And there's no new Avengers film. With all these constant teases and no payoffs, I don't blame a lot of fans, like casual fans, for getting up and walking away from watching this. I mean, it's starting to feel like a burden that's always going to string you along and never pay off.
Yeah, it's just like when my Aunt Helen stopped watching Days of Our Lives. She loved that show, and one day she was just done.
Exactly, Doug. It's exactly like your Aunt Helen not caring that Stefano eventually becomes a good guy.
Stefano becomes a good guy?
No idea. I quit watching Days of Our Lives. And I just have to point out to everyone that all of this has happened before. And I'm not talking about the oversaturation of Westerns in the 1950s. This has happened to Marvel and to comic books in general. Starting with Action Comics #1, superheroes boomed in the 1930s and 40s. Post-World War II, the genre calmed down, was replaced by sci-fi, westerns, romance comics, until it surged back into prominence with the reinvention of The Flash in 1954, which was followed by the Marvel Renaissance of the 1960s. Superhero comics have actually been on a pretty steady plane since then, except in the 1990s. See, in the 1990s, comics went through a huge boom, where speculative collectors were snatching up dozens of copies of a single issue, and the big publishers were creating limited edition foil covers that sold for triple the normal price. Marvel was intentionally flooding the market with books to push indie titles off the shelves at comic book shops. And then Marvel stretched out storylines like Spider-Man's Clone Saga for many years until fans like me finally caught on and then just stopped buying their comics. That's right, I myself, Ryan Airy, once suffered from superhero fatigue until Grant Morrison's JLA book pulled me back in. Now look, Marvel Studios is now in danger of repeating these same mistakes from the comics. And I have to point out that it is never the writers and artists who are making these decisions. It's always the money men, the greedy, stock-obsessed paymasters that have reduced art to commerce. And this is where I gotta point out that the Hollywood establishment hates superhero films. Journalists are tired of talking about them, critics are tired of watching them, and studio executives are jealous of Marvel's box office strength. And fair enough, Marvel does take a lot of air out of the room. I don't blame great artists like Martin Scorsese for resenting the success of these movies, because it makes it harder for Martin Scorsese to make one of his great films about a troubled white man. And this is why we see so many think pieces about superhero fatigue where everybody in the industry is looking to gang up on Marvel. But look, there are very real factors in Hollywood that are not just affecting superhero movies. They are affecting all of Hollywood, all of pop culture, and even our politics. People kind of are in a state of mind where they want something different. I mean, we're about to get our 5th straight presidential election with a Biden or a Trump on the ticket, while polls keep saying that people want something new. So this anti-superhero backlash is ignoring greater trends in the entertainment industry, and frankly, I take offense to it.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, look, man, nerds have ruled pop culture for what, 10 years? Barely 10 years? And it seems like every non-geek hates that. I mean, if we're talking about superhero fatigue, why not talk about sports fatigue? Do you have any idea how many thousands of sports movies there are out there, or how many hours I had to sit through ball games as a kid with a comic book on my lap? Like when ER was canceled, nobody talked about medical drama fatigue, or no one talks about Kardashian fatigue, even though a lot of us hate those guys. But then, like, we nerds, we get this thing that we love, these characters that we love, finally brought to the big screen. All these obscure comic book characters I've read for years, I finally get to see them on the big screen and see them portrayed in live action and see people in mainstream pop culture talking about them. It's been a wonderful 15 years. And then, just as the movies underperform, journalists don't say it's because the movies are bad, they blame superheroes. Like Bill Maher. That idiot went on a rant a few years ago about superhero movies, saying that people who like these movies are stuck in their childhoods. And then, the great writer Peter David penned a response where he pointed out that Maher is part owner of the New York Mets, and sports fans routinely dress up as their heroes and gather together to watch grown men play a child's game with balls. Now look, I like sports, I like my teams, but I think sports fans are way more silly and over the top than superhero fans. And yet, when a team has a losing season, no one says, oh, well, there's Cleveland Browns fatigue for you. They say, gee, I hope they get a better team to root for next year. And it's the same thing with superhero films. To quote my friend Adam Lance Garcia, we are not experiencing superhero fatigue or MCU fatigue, we are experiencing mid fatigue. Give us a good movie and we're gonna watch it. Across the Spider-Verse, Guardians 3, Blue Beetle. All right, well, Blue Beetle was poorly marketed, but man, it was really good. You guys should watch it. It's fantastic. Those movies made money and succeeded because they were great and they showed us something new. And there's also The Boys and Gen V, which gave us a tricky satire of politics and pop culture and college life told through the lens of a superhero-obsessed culture. When Rolling Stone asked James Gunn about the state of superhero movies, he said, if it becomes just a bunch of nonsense on screen, it gets really boring. If you don't have a story at the base of it, just watching things bash each other gets fatiguing. Like, look, I like the Marvels. It was fine. It had at least 2 great sequences in it. But, I mean, the whole movie should have been great. You can tell it was over-edited. In fact, I heard from a friend of a friend who saw an early cut of the film that was much, much better before the studio cut it to ribbons. And the thing is here, guys, superhero movies are not dead. They're not even close to dead. The fans are still there. The Batman was a 3-hour noir film that opened with $134 million. Spider-Verse 2 tripled the opening weekend of the first movie. Hell, even Venom 2 outperformed the first film. And even Black Adam had the second highest opening for a rock movie outside of Fast and the Furious. And Quantumania opened to a franchise high for Ant-Man. And by the way, I got those figures from 007 Kryptonian on Reddit, so if they're not accurate, that's on me for trusting 007 Kryptonian. So the fans are still out there, and we're waiting. So let's talk about what Marvel and James Gunn can do to get us back in the theater. You know, it's funny, with Marvel's like abrupt and unceasing expansion, it seems like they've been following Carol Danvers' catchphrase.
Higher, further, faster, baby.
But instead of going higher, further, and faster, Marvel should be growing upward and not outward. We have seen some superhero films that have really expanded the scope of what these stories can do. Guardians of the Galaxy, Dark Knight, Avengers, Winter Soldier, Spider-Verse, Logan, Deadpool, they all changed the idea of what a superhero movie could be. And we actually saw the Western go through these same phases, you know, parody, reinvention, except after the superhero genre went into these phases, it's continued on. It's still been resonating with our popular culture. Marvel has had a few projects in the multiverse saga that were really big swings, like the Eternals and Moon Knight, but those projects they could have been a lot better. And you get the feeling that if they were doing less and focusing on fewer things, that these movies would have been great.
All his life as he looked away to the horizon, never his mind on where he was, what he was doing.
Like, part of Marvel Studios' problem is they start making the movie before it's actually written. They begin with the visual effects and then plan the story around that. It's how they make movies so fast. So this creates a uniform look and style with really no say from the director. The directors are told, you deal with the actors and we'll deal with the action scenes. That's one problem right there. And then, when you're dealing with these massive budgets, the studios become risk averse and they want to stick to what works. They don't want innovation, they want safety and security. So I say what Marvel needs is smaller budgets, less money, more personal attention.
Or like that memo in Jerry Maguire.
Exactly. This is my mission statement. The best movies from the past few years came from studios who were trusting their talent. Joker, Suicide Squad, Spider-Verse. Executives should hire their people and get out of the way. Stop over-noting. To quote Bill Parcells, a man who made millions of dollars playing out his childhood dreams, by the way, if you want someone to cook, let them buy the ingredients. I mean, guys, we have barely barely scratched the surface of the stories these superhero movies can tell. In the history of Marvel characters, like, we're just now up to like the mid-1970s. The X-Men have never gone to space in the movies. There's never been a live-action Fantastic Four film.
Oh, but what about the one...
There has never been a live-action Fantastic Four film. There are so many incredible stories and characters that we have not seen or just who have not gotten the proper spotlight. Superhero comics offer an incredibly rich lore for these filmmakers to adapt for us. Guys, superhero stories are just getting started, and I, for one, am not fatigued at all. But are you suffering from superhero fatigue? What do you think the problem that Marvel's facing right now is? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.